So then we are back with more understandings on the time of the second tabernacle services, where then we find ourselves during the time of the MashiyAhu, the 61st chapter, and also MatitiYahu, the Levite, 24th chapter, time of restoration and reduction, and then studying from the Aramaic English translation of the word, very close to what the Mashiyach then experienced during his time. Then, as was evaluated before, the spring feast is then layered as then the Galah, or then the autumn feast's writing or indication of the coming of the autumn feast. So then, Gospels truly they do not exist. What does exist is then the spring feast, and then there were people involved with recording of these event of the spring feast found in Leviticus the 23rd chapter. And then obviously while you read, you have to understand then there are 4 writers of the spring feast. Couple of them are Gentiles, should be left at the end for evaluation. And then the first would be Yohanan, the brother of the Mashiyach, or stepbrother, and then MatitiYahu, the Levite. So then we start our quest understanding the spring feast with Yohanan, MatitiYahu. Then we find Shimon and Yaakov. The reason why we have to include then MatitiYahu is because he was a Levite and indicates at first hand what the Mashiyach is expecting as far as the work or the performance or the services of his holy tabernacles. Would be very natural a person from the tabernacle receiving then the first understandings. However, MatitiYahu was not on a mountain of Gerizim while the Mashiyach was revealing and also transfiguring himself and showing then the coming of the autumn feast and the breaking of the seals. We find then ourselves studying then the Megillah of Yohanan, the 4th chapter, where you find then the Mashiyach, he went to Samaria and he spoke with the lady at the water, and then from there she went to the town, and then she divulged his name, and then they came and he was then taken to the city. There was a huge joy and contentment in the city while the Mashiyach was there. The understanding of the spring feast is very, very bad because they doesn't show the Mashiyach as this triumphant person then ready to complete the spring feast. The understanding comes from the very section of the Mashiyach himself explaining as then the portable or mobile tabernacle as then how it was during the time on the desert. So the Mashiyach, he had to take away from Jerusalem this concept of a temple built by hands, and then starting then his tabernacles. That's why the Mashiyach then went to the Samaritans and they received him very gladly. Back in Jerusalem, they were grumpy, they were very upset, they were angry, they did not receive him. The Mashiyach was rejected. However, when he went to Samaria, he was received with the utmost contentment, and then he was able to perform this section of the completion of the spring feast. So then this shows us the Mashiyach then taking from Jerusalem the concept of more than 1,000 years of stagnation. Because as we understand, when the Mashiyach came, the city was contaminated and the city was not secluded. The Mashiyach then had taken the very core, the very best of the city, and he went to the Samaritans. Over there he went up to the Mount Gerizim, and then he transfigured himself and then Eliyahu and Moshe had showed up in the spirit, indicating then the okay, or then receiving the go-ahead, then to start his holy tabernacles. And then as a testimony was there also Yohanan, his brother, where we find then Galah, or revelation, or the unveiling of the autumn feast later. Not only then Yohanan, we had Shimon and also Yaakov. So very important for us to understand where the Mashiyach comes from, because while he was in Samaria, he was absolutely the focus of the entire city, thus indicating the city of the Mashiyach. Does not mean Samaria was the city of the Mashiyach, but the spiritual condition of the city when the Mashiyach was there was as if he was in his own tabernacle, because he removed this concept of Jerusalem where they were contaminated, they were angry, they did not receive him. He was truly rejected. He went to Samaria, and then if you read the understanding what it means, Mount Gerizim is then the mount of prostration, a person prostrate before the mountain, indicating the Mashiyach then in the future would come, and then he would establish his tabernacle. The understanding is in the spirit, not the understanding of a physical tabernacle at the moment, but indicating a motion in the spirit, where then later the Mashiyach then returned to Jerusalem, and then he was persecuted and put to death. So our understanding then of the spring feast, it's not chronological as then we understand from the Gospels. We have to have the understanding of Moshe, and what he did, he started with the tabernacle. The recordings on skin started after the tabernacle was established. We have to understand this factor, because then the Mashiyach, he has the same line of understanding from the previous tabernacle. So then we begin our pairing up of chapters from then Yohanan the 4th chapter. Then you have to understand MatitiYahu, also 1:6 and 1:7, chapter 1:6, chapter 1:7. And then 1:6 making pair with 4, and 1:7 making pair with 5, or Yohanan 5. Then you begin to understand what it meant of a tabernacle-focused understanding and structuring of what it means Torah. So then, the Torah is then in a position where the Shilishim and also the sent ones, prophets, they have to have the foundation of the Torah. Torah is tabernacle. Living Torah means the presence of the Creator in a tabernacle. This is what it means, Torah. Instructions is instructing the people how to become one with the Creator. But then these understandings are reflection then of his person, indicating who he is and educating others of making themselves Torah, and then having a relationship with the tabernacles. So then you begin your understanding then in Yohanan 4, pairing with MatitiYahu 1:6, and then MatitiYahu 1:7 pairing up with 5. Then the 4 and 5 chapters of Yohanan gives you then the outline of this understanding, and the rest of it is related with the timing and events, and then you find then other areas related directly with the tabernacle. Parables, for instance, he used as a filtering system. You find the examples of the miracles, of the 7 spirits of Elohim's 7 functions. You find the Mashiyach prior of going up to Mount Gerizim, He had to be trained for 40 days in the desert. He went out of the desert as the lamb, and he was worthy. Worthy is the lamb. Then you find the Mashiyach exercising then the functions. You find the Mashiyach delegating the responsibilities via these functions, 2 by 2s, 7 by 7s, and then the 70 elders understanding in the midst of this sending. You find the Mashiyach then giving them directives. Then you find the Mashiyach going then to Samaria, because in Jerusalem he was rejected. But this was then part of the plan, because this tabernacle of the Mashiyach had to get out of this contaminated city, and then it started in a place where the people were very glad. They received him with absolutely joy. And then he went out from there, and then he went to Jerusalem, and then he was tried, then he was put to the stake, then he became the Redemptor. Later, then we understand when Yohanan, roughly 100 years later after this event of the mountain, you find then, speaking of the 2 menorahs, or the people, 2 testimonies. These are the 2 menorahs, the 2 tabernacle services. So then you begin to understand the spirit and what it means of having tabernacle focused rather than time and then season mixed up with a pagan and Gentile chronological events, and does not focus the tabernacle. A person can have a lot of knowledge in having the situation chronological or in chronological order. However, if the focus is not the tabernacle, and then people should admit, to those that are set apart, the Mashiyach was rejected. People can't try to make it up for it and try to make a pile of crap and then having a fragrance as roses. What the Israelites did to the Mashiyach was absolutely murderous. The Mashiyach, he went to the Samaritans because he had a plan in mind, and he then completed this section where then later his people began then mostly understanding these factors with Shaliach Shaul. Then roughly 100 years later, you find Yohanan, the very person that was there up on the mountain Gerizim with the Mashiyach, did understand the link, because he was there while Moshe and also Eliyahu had shown up. He does not mention Moshe and Eliyahu because the Mashiyach decided not to say a word regarding them. He was giving clear understanding of the autumn feast, and then Yohanan was told what to write. But you have Yohanan himself as a testimony of the Torah, of the temple, of the persecution of the Mashiyach, of his ascension to the Mount Gerizim, the receiving of the understandings, then the breaking of the seals, and then the instructions of the autumn feast in the future. This makes then the spring feast extremely important, because there are no longer Gospels. From a Hebraic heritage and understanding, you have to understand spring feast and autumn feast. So then whatsoever you have learned of chronological understanding from pagan translations is junk, because it does not reflect the focus of the tabernacle. So then the proper understanding is Torah, first tabernacle service, Torah, second tabernacle service, Torah, Gala, or then the unveiling, and then spring feast, and then autumn feast. Thus Torah, presence of the Creator. So please stay tuned, much more coming up, because there are many more pairings that must be done. So then we begin our quest with the very objective of the situation, and then we retrieve until we find then the least important regarding the spring feast. So then please stay tuned, much more coming up.